Waterfall, the CCW podcast.
Hello and welcome to Waterfall. It's a water saving podcast brought to you by CCW. That's the Consumer Council for Water. I'm Mike. I'm here with co-host Karen. Hi, Karen.
Hello, Mike.
And producer Tom. Hello, Tom.
Hi guys, hey everyone.
So we have a fab episode today. We are continuing our series of going around the world, and we are heading to the Southern Hemisphere and a very well-known location for droughts, which is Cape Town, where there was the famous drought a few years ago, where they were nearing that famous day zero. So we have Rachel Coyle, who is from the Behavioural Insights Team, coming in to talk about that. So stay listening. We'll be getting to that in just a second. Now, Karen, one of the great mysteries of this world is about to be uncovered, I think, because for ages we've been scratching our heads about Tom's water use. Isn't that right, Karen?
Absolutely.
So we've been nagging Tom for probably 2 years about what his water use is, and finally, I mean, it's just a rumour. I mean, can you confirm whether we actually have your water use? Tom, can you confirm what it is? Are you going to do the big reveal?
We do. I first want to say South Staffs is my company, and it was very easy for me to go onto their website and get my e-bill and work it all out there. And I must admit I was nervous getting this statistic because, you know, we love to kind of ruminate on these things. And obviously we've done our league tables, check out all the water tables in the past and all that sort of stuff. But my daily water use, my average daily water use per person per day, 115 litres. 115 litres is where I was put there.
115.
Yeah, that's right.
Just to confirm. Okay, I mean, it's below the national average of 140 something is the national average.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's and not quite at the 110 litres per person per day target that the government are trying to get to in the long term. No. In the long term. So that's not bad.
I'm better than colleagues Leah and Janine. You know, I'm around Professor Lewis. You may remember from Bogota.
Don't give away the whole water table for this series, Tom. Don't give away the water table.
Well, I have to say, Tom, I'm pleasantly surprised because I thought your reticence was going to be because you were really profligate with your water use.
But no, I think Waterfall, you know, has helped me in so many ways in my life, but I think mostly it's made me appreciate the value of water. And, you know, I do scold my partner, who is more shower happy than I am, to resist.
I hope you said scold and not scald. Is that your approach to getting her out the shower? I scold her. I turn the temperature up, and then when she's got some burns, she gets out.
But yes, 150. I just didn't want to be bottom of the table. You know, I didn't want to be in our. And I'm not trying to shame him, but you know, John Lilliworth, we've spoken to recently. You know, so I think 115. It's acceptable, isn't it? It's acceptable.
That's a good solid
it's
performance.
really good.
Well, finally, one of the world's greatest mysteries is solved. I mean, it's up there with, you know, is the Loch Ness Monster real? What is Tom's water use? It's an elusive beast, and we finally pinned it down. So that is fantastic. Right, before we get into it, to Rachel Coyle, our guest, Karen, shall we just remind our listeners we can get in touch?
You can indeed. If you would like to email us, we'd really like to hear from you at podcast@ccwater.org.uk.
Brilliant. And don't forget, check us out on the socials. We're there on CCW Voice. So let's just bring on the guest.
This podcast is brought to you by CCW, the voice for water consumers.
So it's brilliant to welcome Rachel Coyle, who's Managing Director of the Behavioural Insights Team, to Waterfall. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, it's lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, we have been looking forward to you coming on for ages because we have been doing a whole series of going around the world and looking at some of the impacts of water scarcity in different countries. And we're really interested to pick your brains on your experience of Cape Town Day Zero in South Africa. But before we get into that, we just want to touch on your role at the Behavioural Insights Team. Can you just tell us a bit about that team and what you do in particular, if there's any watery stuff you want to talk about?
Sure. So I am Global Managing Director of BIT, Behavioural Insights Team, and we are an international research and innovation consultancy. What we do is we take a deep understanding of human behaviour and match that with a sort of evidence-based approach to problem solving. And we use that to design better public policies and services. And funny you should talk about water-based work, because actually we think about all of our work actually with a bit of a river sort of analogy. So when we try and work on a social issue or a social problem, we try and work on it sort of all the way through the system. And that includes sort of upstream, as we think of it, and midstream and downstream. And so when we're working upstream, we're looking at what we call redirecting the flow. So we're working potentially with government or with institutions, big businesses, and we're thinking about how we can support those in, aligning businesses, aligning markets or institutions with the outcomes that they're targeting. That might be around, shaping competitive markets for sustainable outcomes, for example. And then when we think about the sort of midstream, the back eddy area, we're thinking about really creating an enabling environment. So we're looking at an individual's sort of immediate physical or social or even digital environment. And we're thinking about how we can make sort of, if you're thinking about maybe sustainability, sustainable options easier or cheaper or more socially attractive or more likely to be the default choice for a particular individual. That's really looking at the environment surrounding them. And then we come to downstream, which we think of really as the individual. And that's sort of the bit where we're saying to people sometimes swim harder, and if we're thinking about sustainability or environmental activities, there we might be encouraging citizens to take direct action or looking at ways that we can build public support. And that might be around training or educating or persuading people. So all of our work we think about in sort of a water-based metaphor.
Oh, well, we love water-based metaphors here at Waterfall, and we've got endless water puns that we try and drop into to the swirling whirlpool that is our fairly anodyne comments. But so just in terms of the work of the Behavioural Insights team, are there any UK water projects that you've been doing lately? Is there anything in that space that you can just help orientate our listeners into what you guys do?
No, absolutely. So a good example there would be the work that BIT's been doing with Affinity Water. So we worked with Affinity over a couple of years to explore different ways that water bills can be presented and the impact that might have on customers' understanding and satisfaction levels, but then actually also their behaviour, specifically focusing on water usage. What we did is we sort of looked at the existing bills, and as a very initial point, we did a redesign using plain English. Let's look at sort of cutting jargon. Let's simplify complex language. Let's make sort of complex concepts more concrete. So, where there are very abstract things in the language, we looked at ways that we could make them much more clear and give examples. And then we looked at ways of signposting particularly important bits of information. And then when we'd done that sort of initial cleanup of the bill, we then went into an experimental trial, which is one of the ways that BIT particularly likes to operate. We've got a very evidence-based approach to improving services. So rather than just designing something and assuming it works, we like to design something and ideally several different versions of something and then test which works and how much they work and which works best. And so in this instance, we ran an experiment with 700,000 customers and 7 different versions of a bill. And we were using sort of different techniques in each. So in some of them, we were really drawing on social comparisons. We might send a message to an individual saying, you're using 3% more water than an average similar sized household in your neighborhood. We also tried presenting that on a sort of per capita basis. So rather than saying household, it said per person. Or in other versions, we provided very specific tips on, concretely how people might save water, or we framed that maybe as saving money, or we framed it as taking care of the local environment. It was all the same behaviour, but sort of framed in a slightly different outcome. And then we explored different ways of offering household support. So that could be anything from free home water efficiency check, or you're also sent through sort of little water saving gadgets. And then what we did was we sort of tested the effect of this different type of messaging over a period. We first tested it at 6 months, and then we tested it again at 12 months after the trial, and just assessed, which the best performing message was. So it happened to be actually household comparisons. So for whatever reason, we found that comparing people on a per capita basis actually led to slightly worse results than the sort of control letter. But when we compared households, sent that sort of social norm comparison by households, it was quite a marked improvement. And then also sending people tips, concrete tips on what they could do, made a big difference in terms of their water consumption. So that's just an example of the sort of work that we do. But it's, as you can see, it's quite an evidence-led and sort of experimental approach to thinking about how to help people's comprehension and then also, influence behavioural outcomes.
That's really interesting about the household compared to individuals within the household. I just wonder why you think that might be.
A very good question, and I don't have the answer to it. I think we would want to sort of probably do some focus groups to dig into it a little bit more. I don't know. I wonder. Thinking about my household and thinking not so much about water consumption, but about electricity consumption. I'm pretty convinced my husband goes around leaving lights on all the time. Whereas I know that my behaviour is completely impeccable. So maybe if you said something about my behaviour, I would think, well, I know that I'm brilliant. Whereas if you said something about the whole household, maybe I'd go, I knew my husband was leaving lights on too much.
I did wonder whether that might be the effect, that people are more comfortable thinking, well, there are other members of the household who are obviously a lot more profligate, and that you can almost shift the blame.
Possibility, but I can't give you any evidence for that, and so I'm sort of hesitant to do anything other than admire it as an idea, but it's an attractive one, certainly.
Were there any other messages that particularly landed with people and you could see were having an impact?
So those are the ones that we tested. They were around sort of social comparisons and the the concrete tips of actually how people can make a difference. So that's all I can sort of draw out from that particular trial.
Those trials sound fascinating, actually, and really, really good to just get a flavour of what you guys do in the Behavioural Insights team. We want to focus on day zero in Cape Town in South Africa. So that was back in 2018. I think that's right. So could you just share your experience of it? You obviously don't sound South African, so
yeah, this is a very, I suppose, personal experience. This isn't something that BIT worked on, although it is something that actually was a factor of me becoming increasingly interested and focused on behavioural science. So I was lucky enough personally to live and work in Cape Town from about the beginning of 2016 to the end of 2018. It's an amazing city, absolutely glorious. I mean, iconic with the mountains, the sea, the beach, the winelands. It was also going through quite a challenging period in that, throughout that period, anxiety around water levels in the city dams was increasing, and we were sort of getting closer and closer to the point where there was a genuine risk that the city and the region around it might entirely run out of water. And this was, a really extreme thing for the region, the people in it to go through. And I think what was interesting about it from my perspective was there was a sort of switch in the way the city approached its response to this challenge. So, I mean, obviously, it had seen this coming for a really long time, and experts, specialists in the field had seen it coming for a very, very long time. But the city itself, had a robust water resilience plan in place. So certainly from the beginning of 2017, it had this resilience plan that it's quite a traditional plan. It was drawing on things like punitive measures like fines, water pressure restrictions, and actually ultimately it got to the point of water rationing. And it did make a difference. Households, I think from 2015 to the beginning of 2018, I think households pretty much halved their water usage. So it's not that the traditional way of doing things wasn't working. It was, but it wasn't enough. The beginning of January 2018, very, very seriously, we were in a situation where we thought the taps are going to run dry and the city's going to run out of water. And that could have, absolutely disastrous effects, obviously, for the economy, but also humanitarian. There's an awful lot of people in Cape Town whose lives would have been threatened by the water running dry. And in January 2018, the city sort of pivoted its approach, and it brought together a team of behavioural scientists, and it launched a Day Zero behavioural change campaign. And the whole tone of the campaign changed entirely, and it really made a difference. helped pull the city back from the brink, and it stopped the water supply from running dry. And so the way it did that, so firstly, a little bit like we did with Affinity Water, it focused on making the messages really easy to understand. And then it gave really sort of practical ways of achieving what people were being asked to do. So it suggested things like limits for water. We were all asked to reduce our showers to 90 seconds. And they released a little song that we could sing or play that would be, a 90-second song, which sounds a bit silly. And it kind of was a bit silly, because part of the point was, even in despite of the fact this was very serious, to try and make it as fun as possible. I suppose a little bit of the Blitz spirit, really. And similarly, we were given sort of pretty strong guidance around flushing toilets, under what circumstances we ought to flush and when we oughtn't to flush. And we've got the catchy slogan of if it's yellow, let it mellow, that we I think will stay with me forever. And then things like, so grey water, there was a big focus on how we could use grey water, and we were all taught how to effectively take the water from the runoff from our washing machines and then reuse it to wash our kitchen floors, for instance. Really sort of practical tips like that. They became much more sort of commonly accepted practice. And then they introduced a water map that started, really acknowledging and celebrating, in fact, households saving water. And this was a really transparent and very data-driven approach to the problem. But I think it did two things in particular. Firstly, it slightly flipped the tone from previously. So previously, the city had really had a little bit more of a kind of name and shame approach. There was oh my goodness, that district is using a lot of water, or, that street is using a lot of water. And it was quite a sort of negative focused approach. And the behavioural scientist came in and said, this isn't the way to get people to, really push the final mile. Let's do the exact opposite. And instead, we'll celebrate the people who actually have done a tremendous job. So that started to be the focus. Instead of highlighting negative behaviour, it started highlighting positive behaviour. And that was a really important flip. And also collective recognition. So every time that consumption went down, there was just public celebration. It could just be on the radio, a real recognition, happy songs being played. It wasn't anything sort of particularly concrete, but there was just this sense of, okay, we're a community, we are all in it together, and we're pushing in the right direction. And I think also a really important thing, there was a sense of this was actually achievable. So I think possibly part of the problem before was the targets felt so stretching and enormous. And I think the targets were, we were being asked to use under 50 litres a day of water, which is certainly a lot less, I think, than I would be using at the moment. And it is achievable, because I think 49% of Cape Townians actually managed to hit that target, but it didn't necessarily feel achievable at the beginning. And so sort of putting this sort of really positive and pragmatic and clear campaign together with a feedback mechanism of, how are we doing? Yes, we're making progress. That it really made a difference. It made it possible to reduce water consumption, I think, by a further 30%. So, the city had already reduced its water consumption by about 50% up to the beginning of 2018. And then it pushed that further mile and actually cut another 30% out of its consumption, which was pretty huge at that stage, and managed to, fortunately, avert the crisis, which was wonderful. And I have to say, I know that a lot of the behavioural habits do stick. So a campaign of that nature that's so concentrated really does leave its impact. And I know a lot of Cape Townians who definitely think twice before they flush the toilet now.
I've got a question. I've got a number of questions, but I want to start with a silly one. What was the song? And can we look it up?
I can't remember the song, and I'm not much of a singer, so I think your listeners will have to Google that one.
CCW can help you with your complaints. Visit our website to find out more, ccwater.org.uk.
Was everyone treated the same? Because obviously there is quite a disparity in terms of wealth in a city like South Africa, Cape Town. Was everyone treated the same in terms of targets? And do you have data on how the response varied as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because there's an enormous discrepancy in Cape Town in terms of people's living standards, and then also in terms of their water consumption. And there was a small group of extremely rich people who were also super users of water. Was everyone treated the same? I mean, yes, insofar as the target was a standard expectation, but actually for people in quite impoverished neighbourhoods, they probably weren't that far off that to begin with. So the ask wasn't quite the same on them as it might have been on the super rich. But also, the means of the super rich to be able to adapt were much greater as well. And there has actually been, a lot of data analysis done about the water reduction to see, whether it was across all groups or not, and it was. So I think I've sort of looked at analysis across the super rich, the middle income, and the low income, and there was significant water reduction in all groups, but most significant in the top two. But that was because they had the furthest to go. But actually, the data that I saw suggested that by the end, the super rich were sort of off the bottom of the charts. But I think that's because they had the means to get off the grid. There were people who were, effectively putting their own water collection and also, shipping in big vats of water and living off those. So I think there were the means with some people to, pay a little bit, and then actually the problem goes away.
Yeah, no, fascinating actually in terms of that response there.
The other thing that we've certainly touched on in past episodes of Waterfall is the fact that, it doesn't take a lot if everybody is playing their part, because, you can all save relatively small amounts of water relatively easy. But, once you start adding that up, across the population, you can start to see some really significant savings. So it is, important to get that sense of we're all in it together kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And actually, looking at that point from a slightly different angle, often the changes that BIT is able to achieve through its interventions, they're often not 50%, 70%, 100%. They might be 1%, or they might be 10%. But what we always say, especially when you're dealing with population-wide problems, even a change of 0.5% can be absolutely enormous, when you scale that up to the whole population. So that's certainly something that we very much agree with.
On that theme of linking the theme of we're all in it together, and with the topic about the kind of big differences in wealth and the means to adapt in Cape Town, did it cause any ill feeling that a chunk of population would find it significantly easier to cope with?
I think there's a lot of division in South African society to begin with, and that ill feeling definitely does exist. I think in the moment of the crisis, what was important was that the super rich and the rich were taking action to mitigate their impacts. I think it would have been worse had they not. And in this particular circumstance, better that they did have the resources to help partially solve the problem.
The name Day Zero is a great bit of marketing in terms of eye-catching slogan. Was that created by that team of behavioural insights people that you talked about that had got together when they changed their tactic in January 2018?
I agree, it is a brilliant name. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure, and I don't want to say something on a podcast that then ends with an angry phone call saying, hang on a sec, it was me that invented that. So I'm not entirely sure. You're right. And certainly when BIT thinks about approach to problems like this, we tend to use something we should call the EAST framework. So we do our very best to make things as easy as possible, as attractive as possible, sort of situate them in their social context, and then as timely as possible. And Day Zero is a great example of something being attractive. It's just catchy, people remember it. It was a brilliant choice, whoever did come up with it.
Just looking sort of further out into the future, I mean, I wonder if there are any particular aspects of the Day Zero campaign that you think could be used sort of more widely, in other parts of the world?
So I think it sounds counterintuitive, but the sort of positive tone to it was really important. And the fact that people weren't just told there was a problem, but were really told very specifically what they could do about it. Because I think these enormous problems, there's a risk of catastrophizing to the point that people just think that, firstly, it's completely hopeless, and secondly, that anything that they did wouldn't make a difference anyway, so what's the point? So I think that real focus on this is an enormous problem, but it can be fixed, positive messaging and positive mentality was really important. And then the follow-up with and this is how we're going to fix it. And then the feedback mechanism, so people could see they were making progress. That was obviously heartening, and it's encouraging to people if they can see the dial start to go in the right direction.
And you talked about the map that was produced, but were individual households given any feedback on their own sort of household usage?
Well, I mean, the maps that were produced were very, very detailed. So there was a decision made that sort of transparency and data were going to be given sort of precedence over, potentially privacy of individuals in this particular instance. So that information was definitely available for everybody. And yes, people got feedback on, in terms of their own consumption as well.
Because I think I should know this, but I mean, are households metered in South Africa?
I don't believe they're metered, no.
Oh.
No, so they're sort of, I think districts and streets often are.
Just to help bring it to life from your own perspective, how was the experience living there? How does that compare to what you've seen, say, compared to living in the UK through, we had our drought a couple of years ago and people were getting a bit anxious then. Just how different was that experience?
Well, I mean, when it came to 2018, it was very different. I think there are actually some similarities, though, when you move a bit earlier in time. And one of the issues in Cape Town was just a kind of disbelief, even though people academically or logically knew it to be true, but a disbelief that this was really a problem in a city that is surrounded on two sides by water. It is famous literally for its sea. And I think the UK has a similar problem. Like, I think we just have a fundamental blockage over really internalizing the fact that this is an issue when we are, constantly complaining about the rain. And so I think there were, at an earlier stage than 2018, there were definitely more similarities, I would say, than differences to the experience.
And for you personally, did you have to, obviously you had to adopt your 90-second shower and things like this. Were there any things that you discovered about your own behaviours and habits that kind of made you go, this is a good, easy thing to do?
You don't need to shower as much as you think you need to.
Oh, that music to my ears. Music to my ears there, Rachel.
And it's okay not to flush the loo in the middle of the night. When you've got that sort of crisis of, am I going to wake everyone up or am I going to leave the loo? I learned to be okay with not flushing the loo. Yeah,
that's one of the ones in our household is been adopted just permanently. Starts when you have young kids. I don't want to wake them up. So, yeah. In the end then, Cape Town didn't hit day zero. Was it due to the campaign and the behavioural stuff, or was it just down to the weather?
It was both. If the campaign hadn't been effective, if they hadn't cut that further 30% of water usage, and actually if before then they hadn't already cut 50% of water usage, then they absolutely would have run out of water. But not using water doesn't refill the dams. So it was also then due to the fact that fortunately the weather changed and the rain started, thank goodness.
Great. We have a really important final question that we always ask. And it's what's known as the Karen question.
Yes, I always get the short straw here.
It's not a horrible question.
No, we do have an unhealthy interest possibly in people's water usage, and whether or not they know how much they use on a daily basis. So I just wondered whether you actually know how much your water use is at the moment.
So I didn't know that, but I was given prior warning of this question, so I very dutifully went away to do my homework. And I was quite anxious when I did so because we actually had a baby about 2 years ago. And I'm going to say our water consumption, my assumption was our water consumption has gone through the roof since then. Obviously, the laundry of the newborn, but then ever since he's been able to walk, his two favourite hobbies are running around and either turning the bath taps on and then leaving them for me to find at a certain point, or his new hobby is to go around and flush as many toilets as he can find. And that can't be good for my consumption. And the other thing that I'm sure wasn't good for my water consumption, but was a decision that was made in good faith, was we, for environmental reasons, made the decision to use reusable nappies. And I've never been quite sure whether that was the right decision or not, because obviously we're very concentrated on landfill and not wanting to be buying umpteen rounds of packs and packs and packs of nappies, but it did create an awful lot of laundry, which was firstly inconvenient and unpleasant. But I have never been quite sure whether the sort of energy usage of the washing machine and the water usage of the washing machine definitely offset the other impacts of disposable nappies. So anyway, so I went to go and find my water consumption with a really anxious mindset, and I'm afraid the answer is I don't know, because we're not metered, so I still can't tell you, but I suspect that my water consumption is not brilliant at the moment.
You've got we've got there are some water meter calculators available. You can do a rough sum if you are interested. We've got one on our website as well, which will calculate how much you use and whether it's worth you moving to a meter. So it's actually, it only takes a few minutes and literally could save you hundreds of pounds. And actually, I found our water consumption on average went down with small kids, even with all the reasons you've set out, Rachel, because obviously you're now dividing your household water use by an extra person as well. And even the little person's behaviours don't, it actually did, it led to a fall in our house. So I think you might be surprised in a good way.
Okay, well, that's a useful tip. I will check out your website. Thank you.
So Rachel, thank you so much for joining us. It's fascinating to hear your experiences. And now I want to find out more about the Behavioural Insights team. But thank you so much for coming on Waterfall.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Be sure to head back through the archives and check out all the past episodes of Waterfall.
So there we have it. That was Rachel Coyle there from the Behavioural Insights team, taking us to South Africa, sharing insights there. Lots of stuff to think about in what Rachel was saying. The thing that struck me was that the whole phrase day zero really is like a marketer's dream there. It's so punchy and to the point and really kind of sets out that, if action isn't taken, then those are the consequences. What did you think, Karen?
Well, I mean, we've been trying through the podcast to raise awareness to some of the challenges that we face in the UK, so that we can hopefully get people generally thinking about their water use, doing their bit to save water and avoid a potential situation like that happening here. Yeah,
good point. Avoid day zero. Let's hope it never happens here. But that can't be guaranteed given that what we're seeing with water resources and climate change. So plenty to reflect on. We're pretty much out of time though on this edition of Waterfall. Just a quick reminder, you can get in touch with the show.
You can email us at podcast@ccwater.org.uk.
So we would absolutely love to hear from you. Don't forget to check out our extensive back catalogue. We're now in the 80s in terms of episodes. That's incredible. So please do check out Waterfall. It's your constant companion. So that's it. That's it from me, Mike. Bye-bye.
Goodbye from me, Karen.
And goodbye from me, producer Tom.